Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is going to be kind of an interesting one, I think, because I came up with this idea earlier today to talk about astrological influences as they relate to cults and religious abuse. And I'm going to also include the kind of new age, I don't know how to classify this, these sorts of groups um, that exist as well. I mean, you can talk about cults from a variety of angles. It's not just one particular religious affiliation. As a matter of fact, there's a saying that some of you probably know where they say that a cult is any group or belief system that isn't your own. And while it's supposed to be funny, there is a grain of truth in that because sometimes people they have no problem believing what they believe in, but then they condemn other people for their beliefs. And I'm going to be talking about certain things. I don't want people to take offense at them. Like, for instance, if I define a cult, because I'm going to talk about first and foremost my definition of the word cult and give some examples. And if you belong to that religion, it's not meant to condemn you or anything like that. I just think that there are problematic elements to these certain groups, and that creates more problems for the legitimacy of that belief system. But that doesn't mean that I am telling people, oh, you shouldn't be part of something. You have to have your own discernment, obviously. I'm not one of those people that cares about, trying to save people from certain belief systems. Sometimes that can be the best teacher for them, is going through that process. But, there can be dangers that have been very well documented that have cost people their lives. So it isn't just completely benign. But anyway, my definition of a cult is any organization of a spiritual nature, and I will extend it to some kind of philosophical framework that, promotes certain belief systems and rules to live by. Let's put it that way. But one of the biggest, most powerful facets of cults is the group component. And I just finished, I actually got kicked out of a group that was supposed to be a free version of a paid group that was going to last for a year, that had it was for people who are spiritual, who are also entrepreneurs. And some of you know about these. There are multiple groups like this out there where they're going to teach you how to you know make a lot of money and be spiritual and stuff like that. And so one of the things I observed while they were doing their whole spiel was that the group dynamic was a very important component. People started bonding. People started like kind of defending these individuals from outer criticism from those people who had joined the group and were like, oh, is this, really a good type of practice or something along those lines. And this is one of the things that a cult mentality can produce is that even the members, it's kind of like Stockholm syndrome in a way. I mean, well, I shouldn't, it's probably not right to characterize it that way, but yeah, I mean, in a sense, you could say that the person is defending the tactics of the leader from other members who are sometimes asking very pointed, important questions about, you know, the teachings of this organization or this, if you want to call, like, some of these things are not actual like religions or spiritual belief systems. They're practices that are tied into spirituality that have, maybe there's some profit to be made. And it's like, is it ethical to do this or that? And to make money if it's from a spiritual point of view. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky, because I believe that when you're, in the business, if you want to call it that, of spirituality, if you are doing something that's connected to spirituality, your ethics have to be impeccable and your motives have to be impeccable. It's like, people who say, oh, we're all destined for abundance. That's all well and good, but it can't come at the expense of vulnerable people, or any kind of people. But vulnerable, I mean, not just psychologically vulnerable, but maybe financially vulnerable, who really, really want to, transition from a job that they can't stand to something that they feel is more aligned with what they want. And that's, perfectly normal, but sometimes there's certain tactics that are used that are not necessarily of the highest caliber, ethically speaking. So I'm going to lump those kinds of situations into this as well, because it has a spiritual connection. I'm also, let me just start by talking about, what would make up a cult. I just want to say this very briefly. And like I said, it can be the group dynamic, and it can appeal to people who feel very isolated, who feel rejected. Maybe they never have belonged. It is one of the most basic human desires. I was going to say needs, but I don't really believe it's necessarily a need. A person may think it's a need, but it's not. I don't believe it is a need, but a desire to belong, to have a sense of belonging. So if somebody, let's say somebody comes from a fractured family of origin, they're already in that state of feeling like they're on the outside looking in, or that there's not that unity when they're growing up. And so they may seek it in other types of groups. And they talk about young people that join gangs, is that's one of the main reasons why they join a gang, is to feel that sense of camaraderie. And so that can make somebody vulnerable, to want to belong. Another thing is this idea of feeling safe, feeling protected, like there's safety in numbers. So if there's a whole bunch of people believing certain things, then it feels like it's more real. When you have people sitting around and kind of debating certain spiritual tenets, it can make a person question their beliefs, which is actually a very healthy thing. But sometimes people who are very insecure in terms of their beliefs, they want something that is very dogmatic, because then it seems like it's so true because it's being stated as fact. And that's actually like a red flag. If you belong to a group and it's like, this is how it is, and there's no sense of like any leeway, wiggle room, that kind of thing can be very dictatorial. And you could even say it's like a form of brainwashing, because this is another aspect of that, of why all of this is like mind control, and control in general, is remember that, well, first of all, I'm coming from a Western perspective. I'm coming from an American perspective. So I can't speak to other countries, but I can say that the United States was allegedly founded on these principles of like, we're breaking free from this oppressive religious authority. Okay. And so I believe that when there was the separation of church and state, that was all window dressing to give the illusion that we were actually free. They just, it's like a shell game. They just changed who the captors were. Instead of the church, it became the government. So take your pick, who you want your captors to be. One of the key, common traumatic experiences or effects from religious abuse is abuse of power. And this is why I was talking about brainwashing or mind control. It's not something where the person is necessarily being held down physically, shackled against their will. It's all on the mental level. So it can mean that the person is being told that if they don't do X, Y, and Z, then bad things are going to happen. So there are three main, what I'd call negative or challenging emotions that cults bring up. And you could say organized religion in general does this. And that is a form of religious abuse too, just because it's not, officially known as a cult. They shame people, they guilt people, and they frighten people. What is the main way that people are shamed? Well, it's through sex, because, the thing is that sex is biological. Sexual desire is biological. And of course, it varies from person to person. But if somebody can get you to believe that your sexual desire is evil, then they've got you. Now, that does not mean that I'm saying, oh, yeah, just go for it. Anything, goes. No, that's not what I'm talking about, but I'm talking about the shaming of it. Then there's the guilt. Well, in Christianity, we say Jesus died for your sins. So, therefore, you owe Jesus. Something like that. Or if you don't go to church every Sunday, if you don't pray to Allah 5 times a day, or meditate, the Hare Krishnas, they do 16 rounds a day on their japa beads, then you are not fulfilling your spiritual duties. Or if you don't dedicate your life to God, if you don't give 10%, if you don't tithe, there's all kinds of things that people are guilted with. And that's a form of control too. Don't get it twisted. That is a very potent form of control. Guilt. Fear. Burning in hell. Take your pick, whatever version. I'm sure that, I don't know about other religions, I just know about Christianity, but I'm sure that every religion has its own version of what happens when you don't do as you're told spiritually. And When I talk about religious abuse, we're talking about the upper chakras, okay? So the upper chakras are the fifth, sixth, and seventh chakras. By the way, before I continue this, I have I've typed out a little bit here just to organize my thoughts, but by no means have I really. I'm not good with outlines. That's not my that's not my bag and my thing. So I just like type some stuff I wanted to talk about. But a lot of times when I do astrological videos that are kind of informational, I'm looking online at different sources. This is purely my own ideas. So I just want to make that clear. And I didn't even bother to look up anything like this for this topic because I assumed it didn't exist. But the other thing that I want to mention is that what I'm saying, like when I'm going to talk about the upper chakras, I haven't really looked this up. Maybe I should before I actually say it. I probably will, but whatever I say, this is kind of like going by my own ideas. So the fifth chakra is in the throat region, and it is the chakra of communication. So it can be about speaking your truth, okay? Now, when you belong to a religion, especially like a cult, you're not allowed to have your own truth. You have to believe what they believe. If you try to say something that goes against that, you will be met with not so pleasant results, and or reactions from the person that is in charge. And this is, I would say too, in terms of communication, it's like the type of communication that's provided from these leaders of these groups can be heavy-handed, and therefore you receive them in a way that is a little bit over the top. And in some people who, especially who are vulnerable, they may be like, oh my gosh, I have to believe this, because there's absolutes. When you're dealing with absolutes, there isn't room to question. And that's really what the fifth chakra, if it's healthy, if it's balanced, the person takes in information while also questioning it. It's not just like this rigid mind that can't take anything in, but it's not also somebody who's so open that they don't even question anything that they're receiving from some source. The sixth chakra is your own intuition, and that means that you're able to resonate with things and you're able to use your discernment. And some people that are in spiritual settings, they don't have a very balanced sixth chakra. Maybe it's underactive, and they are very prone to question themselves, question their own. Like for instance, let's say they were going to some kind of information session about a spiritual, center or teacher, and they got some kind of weird feelings about that person or about that environment, about the teachings. And then they second guess themselves and they talk themselves out of those weird feelings. And that can be because they don't trust themselves. They don't trust their own judgment. So it's like the third eye, the sixth chakra. So it's how we perceive things at a deeper level. Now we have that mind, that intellect, but that intellect can only operate on the surface. And it's dealing with mundane reality. It's not dealing with the type of underneath, beneath the surface type of stuff. In the past several years, I think, and I'm recording this in 2024, I think the lies have ratcheted up, and it really takes somebody who has discernment to make informed choices, to make choices that benefit the individual. The person who is just going along with the program, doing whatever they're told, if the person has these credentials that make them look like they know what they're talking about, that type of person, they're going to just like go along with the program. The person that is discerning, they're like, well, I'm going to do my own research. I'm going to look into this. I'm not going to, or if it's some kind of a news story, I'm not going to automatically believe that because they said that. How do I know that this is true? How do I know that this is not just a manipulation? And the seventh chakra is this is they say that there's more than seven chakras now. So, you know, I don't know. No, I think the eighth chakra is like above the crown, but this is the crown, the seventh chakra. And this is like the connection to God specifically. Okay. Now, this one can be abused too, because if somebody tells you that you need to do X, Y, and Z to get to be closer to God, then you might do it if you really have the strong desire. And I'm going to talk about different astrological influences that may make a person like that, where they really want to get closer to God, because there are some specific ones that might be vulnerable to that. And, we have seen sexual abuse, for instance, within the spiritual community, within some very prominent teachers. And maybe not with those teachers themselves, but within the organization, but sometimes with some teachers as well. And it's very sad, because what happens is, just when that news gets out that some fellow students were abused, that can lead other students to feel let down, feel disillusioned, and that can be connected to that seventh chakra, where they might just reject everything. Some people become atheists because they feel that it was just all trickery, it was fake. Also, there can be financial exploitation, and this can occur through a religious organization, but also, like I said, some of these groups that are, with the abundance mindset, and they're connected to spirituality, they can use those tactics too. And I want to make it clear, I'm not saying that they're all just like predatory. Maybe there are some that are very above board and stuff like that, but when they do use tactics that seem to be manipulative, and bringing in this idea of like, well, it's your birthright to be abundant, and sometimes they might imply that if you're not, if you haven't experienced that you just haven't been, you're just not spiritual enough. And maybe that's, in some cases, my interpretation of it. But it can be one of those tactics where you're like, oh no, I don't want to be viewed in that way. I want to be seen as somebody who's very trusting in God and knows that I'm going to be able to make it. But even like tithing, if somebody doesn't want to tithe the whole 10%, are they seen as less than, or cheap, or they don't trust God enough? maybe they're given those kinds of messages sometimes, and then it becomes like, oh well, let me prove that I'm really um, trusting of God, or let me prove that I'm really supportive of this organization too. That's another aspect of it. And so it can get pretty intense and convoluted, because a lot of emotions can come up for people when they are dealing with these issues. As I talk about these things, I realize I'll probably do two videos, part one and part two, because this first one is an introduction to this whole concept of cults. And I think it's a really important thing to explore, because a lot of people will. I just had somebody say to me, oh, what are the timestamps, because they were looking for something with their particular aspect that I was talking about, and I was lumping it in with other aspects. And I wish that people would be more holistic with information, and not just kind of like, oh, I just want to find out about what my thing is. Because when I'm talking about these things, I'm going to go back and forth. So timestamps with me is a joke. It's not, because I'm not like that linear where I'm just going one, two, three. Even if I write stuff down, I'm still going back and forth. I also want to just talk about a situation that happened for me when I was in my early teens, and some of you who grew up in the 70s will know exactly what I'm talking about. I'll never forget seeing that cover. I think it was Newsweek, of Guyana, Jim Jones, and all those people, and they had all these people, these dead bodies on the ground in little Dixie cups of empty Kool-Aid by their side or whatever. And we were told that it's almost like this doomsday cult, but actually later on they found out that there were people with bullet holes. There were people that resisted drinking that Kool-Aid. So it's a terrible situation, because that might have been a mind control uh, thing going on there, because a senator named Leo Ryan went to Guyana to investigate, and he was gunned down. And I remember even then being like, wow, this person was killed because of this. And there's this narrative that's going around of like, okay, this is how it happened, but it turned out that it wasn't like that at all. And what happens with these groups? Some of these groups get infiltrated by the CIA, or they're even created by the CIA. And yeah, you can call me a conspiracy theorist if you want. I prefer you can call me a conspiracy realist, because in the 1970s, there were the idea of cults was something that was very big back then, and they even had deprogramming and stuff like that. Why I believe that that happened is because they wanted to demonize looking within. Because after the 60s, and of course, there was also like the psychedelic drug use that occurred not only in the late 60s but into the 70s. People were searching, and they were looking more within. And that's something that those that wish to control do not want the public to do. They want to be in control of the narrative, not some kind of spiritual quest. So making these alternative spiritual groups look like they were very dangerous. The Hare Krishnas, I've gone to Hare Krishna temples the past few decades. It's not a cult. you can leave anytime. Nobody's going to, hold you against your will. They don't even talk to you most of the time. But they did get infiltrated. I will say that in the 1980s, the 70s and 80s, it went into the 80s, and there was a big temple in West Virginia where unfortunately there were children that who were abused, and we know that there is uh, the sexual abuse of children is something that is unfortunately happening with some of these organized religions. But what happened was with the Hare Krishnas is that I believe that some people um, got into that group who became powerful, and then bad things happened. And I think there might have even been drugs and stuff like that. But they cleaned it up, and it's not like that. But of course, there there are definitely situations where, with isolation tactics, that, what one red flag is if you leave a group, you try to leave a group and they try to prevent you from doing so, and they all gang up on you, or if they shun you for leaving the group, then you know that you're dealing with a cult. I'm not going to name names. I thought I was going to, but I just don't feel like it. But those kinds of tactics are things that people should really pay attention to if they have been experiencing them in a particular organization that they belong to.